All right, good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock and we just got a few people just jump on. So we will wait just a couple minutes and then we will, Roy will start on starts. We're gonna do some stuff on starts, some stuff on tactics, and then we're gonna ask you what you want. Kristen Berry has some data from the both the tracking, the chartered sales trackers, and the Velocitex that people dropped off to him. One thing that we're finding that as we use different devices and new devices, and the new Velocitech now has heel. He has a good comparison of heel and how important heel is on the boat. So that's also something that he's learned and we've all learned, that chartered sales can add that to the equation when you have that. So it looks like we have small group to start, but we have some good guys. Chris Stockey, who was on Superior 2, Zeke on Imperia, and I guess I'm supposed to look at the results, but Zeke, you guys won, right? Yeah, okay. Imperia guys have been doing well all year and doing, they're going to sail again this next week. And so definitely Zeke has been very helpful with talking to us about what's going on with their progress and how they're making their boat go fast. I think one thing I would like to point out that happened, that I've kind of noticed with teams that have really done everything and put the effort in, we have seen, we've seen the successes, and I think that's what's really cool. The sold guys were super stoked with some top 10 finishes. I know Sean O'Brien made a comment, on his Facebook about, his first bullet at Davis Island. I just think those are things that show what we've been doing, and the teams that have been able to make it here, they did benefit from it. So that makes me feel proud of being able to pull off all these events. And sometimes it's also better to not, 60 boat fleet is awesome, but sometimes can't make some of these progresses with that many boats. So I am going to turn it over to start to Roy, and he's going to go over, he had some good start videos, and I know one of them Zeke is in, so we'll get Zeke to jump in on that. And actually, I think that video, Chris Stockey's boat, is also in that mix. So Roy, do you want to start off with the starts that we were going over earlier?
Yes, sir. Let's get some zoom going. Not that much zoom. Okay. So for background information for this start, there you go. You can see the line from here. As everyone's approaching, there's sort of this massive lefty that came in. And what we're looking for here is how a few boats especially handled it. There's plenty of boats that aren't making the pin end of the mark. They're below that starboard ley line to the pin, and you'll see a few boats bail out here in a second and make very good of a potentially bad situation.
Zeke, why don't you go and unmute here and be ready, because I know you are in this sequence making one of those good last minute moves. And so is Chris Kostanecki with the gray mainsail. So as Roy talks through it, Zeke, feel free to jump in. Bow. And then Stockey, do you see yourself in here or not?
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit later.
I'm more interested in hearing what the guys who were there had to say. I think we can all sort of see the same thing from this video, and I'll play through it again.
Yeah, this is Zeke here. I could jump in if you guys want. This just kind of came back into my mind. I think this was the last start of the regatta, maybe. And it was definitely a sporting one. It happened a few times over the weekend where when you got onto your final starboard approach, there would be that big left shift, like you mentioned, Roy, and it's like very quickly becomes apparent that your meters aren't going away as the seconds are, and it's a very difficult angle of attack to get back to the line. And it kind of sounds basic, but the most important thing to do is recognize that and get the boat moving right away. Anytime there's a left shift, it takes way longer to get to the line. Anytime there's a right shift, it's a lot faster to get to the line. And it became very obvious basically as soon as we tacked to starboard, which was before this. We got on starboard and we recognized it. We went jib out right away and started trying to get our speed up. Everybody on the boat knew that we were racing basically from the time we got to starboard. And we were directly behind a couple of boats and really having a hard time making the line. And what's good about the early recognition is that it gets you more options, because we recognized that we needed to start racing on starboard early on, and it was before this. It got us a little closer to the line and then gave us the ability to actually double tack. So I think a little bit before this, we were on starboard, we tacked to port and closed a lot of distance to the line. You can close a ton of distance back to the line on port, which is the only way that we actually got up to the line, and then tacked back to starboard in the big lefty, and that at least made us relevant. And then what got really scary in this one is that as we, like a couple guys that were way further down to the pin, they're thinking, oh, this is an easy, port tack the fleet. And as we started getting closer to the line on starboard, you can see there's like a little helicopter puff touching down right at the mark right now. And it was a massive righty. So the guys who actually thought they were going to be able to port tack the fleet, when they went and did their tack, they realized, oh crap, the breeze is back to the right, like bow 64 here. Right up until that moment, they would have crossed us easily, but the breeze went back right. So it was just a good lesson in staying kind of nimble in the start and keeping your head up. But you had to recognize really early how far left shifted it was, and we were racing for the last minute of the sequence, including 2 tacks to get back to the line. So.
Excellent. Thank you for that
So
commentary.
Roy, let me ask Chris Stockey. Chris, are you there? Because I see you are the boat that kind of stops the boats from going over further on port. And I'd like to hear what happened with him.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Hey, sorry guys, I'm driving, so if it sounds weird. Yeah. It was obviously really tricky, like Zeke said, because the lefty would always be there at some point.
Hey Chris, you're cutting out a bunch. I don't think we got most of what you said.
We didn't do the best job, but some things I think about on the boat are you can slow down 2 ways. You can slow down using your sails, or you can slow down using your rudder, which is sailing more distance. And that's one thing I think Zeke's kind of talking about. Recognize.
Hey Chris, I'm going to go ahead and take over. Unfortunately, your connection is pretty bad, so I don't think we got much of what you were saying. I heard you talk about slowing down, and I'm going to sort of go off of that and try to say what I think you were trying to say. And that's with this big, we have this big lefty into a big righty. So with the big lefty, everyone's sort of racing to the line, and then with the righty back, suddenly you're much closer to the line, right, with this puff touching down than you anticipated. And we see 6-9 do a very good job of slowing down here. You see they're a bit bow out on boat 70 here, and they realize early enough that they're just a little bit too early. And you see they really kill speed high. So they luff their sails and they pinch up. And it slows down just enough where they're able to, again, get their bow down after that and get speed. And, you know, it still have a pretty good start after that. You see they're a little bit back on 7-0, but it's about as good of a start as you can expect for when it's slightly pin favored there. So again, that just goes off of what everyone was saying about just being dynamic and recognizing changing conditions early. The earlier you notice them, the better you can recover and get racing again.
Yeah, hey Roy, it's Kristen. I wanted to add something to that because I saw Imperia do this twice, once in a practice start, obviously, and then once in this start. And it's not the first time they've ever done it. And I think that having that double tack in your playbook and even having like a word so the whole team knows to shift into the double tack move is a pretty powerful play. I saw a couple of teams execute it. I saw a couple of teams not pull it off over the weekend, and it's something that has to be practiced. It's like a jibe set. You can't hope to do it right the first time, and it's worth putting into the playbook for practice. I also think that as someone who finds himself sometimes not on the line on time at full speed, recognizing it early and getting onto port tack, getting across the grain can sometimes be not the worst start in the world. So yeah, you're on port, you're ducking a few boats off the line, but if that righty's on its way, you're going to be early to greet it, which can be a powerful recovery tool. And at this series this winter, we found that if we had a marginalized start, getting across the grain and just ducking those rudders until we could get into a clear space was sometimes pretty salvageable for the rest of the race. It wasn't as detrimental as we might have thought by starting in the second row, so long as we didn't sit there and suffer. You know, you have to be affirmative on trying to find your exit and get out of there.
Yes, if you're going to sit there and suffer, you have to have a very, very good reason to do that. Like maybe a day like Sunday would have been a day where sitting there and suffering would be the right call because those lefties just kept coming down. And a lot of people who went right and maybe were tricked by a little temporary puff that showed on the right just got very punished for it.
Hey, Roy, Zeke here again. I would just add one more thing, and Kristen, I think, was spot on with that analysis, but just back up to the recognition of the big left shift in the pre-start. Most of us are kind of training to do this port tack approach on the line for in the last, at about 2 minutes, most of us are on port, kind of jockeying for our spot, and then we tack to starboard. And it's when you're on port that you really want to recognize what the shift is, if it's already in there. If you're, reaching parallel to the line and it's a pretty broad reach, or you're having a hard time, slowing down on port because the wind has shifted behind you as you're reaching, that's your first telltale sign that we're in a left shift. And from that point, it's really important that you close distance to the line still on port before tacking to starboard. Because if you just try to go from a broad reach on port straight into attack to close hauled on starboard, that's how you get really far behind the line right away. If you can recognize while you're still on port reaching that, hey, this is a broad reach, it's a big left shift, then what you want to do is before tacking to starboard, actually just harden up on the breeze and sail up to the line close hauled on port just for, even 2 or 3 seconds and kind of smooth out that turn and do a bigger circle turn with a little bit more accurate sail trim and come out to the line a little bit closer to the line with a bigger gap to leeward of you so that you have some ability to accelerate on starboard. And now you're hipped up further upwind on the line compared to the boats that will be to weather of you. And that's where the optionality for the double tack really comes from. And just don't forget that if it's really difficult to lay the line on starboard, it's really easy to get there on port. So having the ability to even just put the bow down on starboard, then tack to port, you're going to crush meters to the line on port and then tack back to starboard a lot closer and just keep your options a lot more open.
Yes, excellent. That yeah, looking out during your preparation phase, when would you say, so, in the 5-minute sequence for the start, is there sort of, everyone has their routine before the start. Is there sort of, I mean, everyone's trying to always be dynamic and look for changes, but is there a time where you sort of say like, okay, this is our plan and we're executing this plan now, like at 4 minutes or 3 minutes, are you like finalizing your plan and then looking for a hole after that? What would you say is your pre-start routine in terms of planning?
Well, in these smaller fleets, smaller lines, you can definitely afford to be a little bit later to make your decision. But generally, we like to try to hang out near the middle of the line and be in the middle of the line at about 4 minutes and be reaching down the line towards the pin on starboard. And our routine is to always approach the line from just outside the pin at a given time based on where we want to start. So as we're making our way down the line from about 4 minutes to about 3 minutes, that's kind of when we're giving our last look upwind. And by about 3 minutes, we're getting down towards the pin. And that's usually at 3 minutes would be the last time that you could leave the pin and still make it to have a boat end start. So I'd say by 3 minutes, we're starting to get into the territory of, being certain of where we're going to start. And if, we really want to go hard left, we're going to give ourselves the options to be kind of last into the line on port, which is usually about 2 minutes, like leaving the pin at about 2 minutes. And so anywhere between 2 and 3 minutes is where we decide we're kind of exiting the pin on port and sailing back up the line to give ourselves the chance to tack back to starboard somewhere between a minute and a minute 20 usually. Hope that answered the question a little bit, but it's,
Yes.
I think,
Yes, it did.
Zeke, so I think, and one thing you're showing and Roy is showing here is, get in the flow with everybody. You're closer to the line when you're going on starboard, you're farther from the line when you're going on port. And one thing to think about, as Zeke mentions, you're paying attention to the shifts and things. When you get to that pin end, no matter what the time is, as a tactician and as a driver, maybe you should be asking. But depending on where you end up close to the line, you should be saying, okay, normally you're going to be jiving at the pin, but if the wind shifted and, there may be attack at the pin to head back. And those are decisions that, if the driver feels like something happened and he doesn't know, he can ask his tactician, but the tacticians normally be on it. So that's kind of like the pattern you want to get into.
And yeah, spot on, Ed. And I think the last part of that is how many meters you want to be kind of entering at. So in a perfect world, we know, we'll decide we want to be going past the pin 30 meters below the pin on port at 225. That's the plan. And that will usually end up with sort of that middle pin end location on a regular size starting line. So, and you're right, depending on the wind shift, the amount of meters that you're going to enter at depends a little bit. And it also depends where the rest of the fleet is kind of setting up. You kind of just fall in line on port, get yourself in the mix and free to tack.
Yeah, and I know one thing Chris was trying to say, but we couldn't understand him is, can you explain this, Zeke? Is, sometimes you need to use your sails to slow down, and sometimes you need to use your rudder to slow down. And I think in a way you did a little bit of both of that, and you need to do a little bit of both of that. But can you talk about why you'd use your rudder to slow down the boat versus just the sails or vice versa?
Probably depends on how fast the boat is going already. Like, in this case here, we called racing from a minute out. So the boat was going fast. We were going over 5 knots for the last minute probably. So when you're going that fast, you can't necessarily just ease the sails and slow down because the boat's tracking so much. You need to add in that extra drag by doing some big rudder movements. So probably generally speaking, the faster your boat is going, the more aggressive you need to be with using your rudder to slow down. And if you're a little bit more down speed, still, working to get flow over the foils, it comes down more to your sails and bigger, smoother turns of just having the boat pointing in the correct direction relative to the wind so that the sails can luff. It's a little tough in the 70 with, a lot of times we don't even have our jib out for the last minute of the start. But I think if your bow is down, like for a little while there, we were trying to kill speed with our bow down, so we didn't want to sail over the line. In that case, we have the main over trimmed a little bit and the jib out a lot, which is gonna like stalling the boat on that point of sail, but then going to become accurate for heading the boat back up. So the jib's already out, the main's in when we want to head back up and re-accelerate. So maybe a little too wordy there, but I think generally the faster your boat is going, the more rudder you need to stop, and the slower the boat's going, the more slow sweeping accurate turns with, you know, the correct sail trim or ease will help you slow down.
Okay, and then Zeke, how often are you just communicating in just in general about during the sequence? And you and John have been sailing together a lot. Your whole team has. So maybe say what you're doing now and what you were doing like when the team was new.
Yeah, when the team was new, it's funny because we talked about that and we made a joke, maybe at John's expense a little bit at this weekend, because he's gotten really freaking accurate as a helmsman of knowing, like, we've just done the same, pattern so many times now that when we're kind of jockeying for position to get into that port kind of train in the last 2 to 3 minutes, he's just doing it. He's, doing the little rudder wiggles and heading up and heading down the right amount, maintaining the right amount of flow to fall in line correctly. So at the beginning, I was talking a lot more and trying to tell him, what the correct angle was to sail the boat, to end up letting a boat to leeward slide forward so we could slide in behind him. And now he understands the goal and he does it. So nowadays, definitely chatting less, and I talk a little bit more big picture about which boat we're going to tack under, or going to go astern of 32 and then tack or something like that. And I always try to make sure that in our last tack from port to starboard, that I help him understand the angle that we want to come down on starboard at. If we want to tack and do a big down on starboard to defend, or if we want to tack and go right into a high kill to start trying to build a hole, I think is really important, so he knows where to put the bow. And then once we have the jib out and going, it's a lot more just kind of me managing the meters per second and in the flow. So I'll say whether or not we need to be killing hard or starting to get some more flow. And then if everything goes pretty well and we've maintained the right amount of flow so that the acceleration is easy, usually I'll say something like aiming at the pin, which comes at that kind of 15 seconds or 10 seconds, depending on how quick you're going to do that final acceleration. And then I say racing. And hopefully the racing call comes still with 4 or 5 seconds left, so that we have enough room behind the line to put the bow up and cross the line, sailing close hauled and flat with the sails trimmed correctly.
So I think one thing that you also, you're saying these terms and they're perfect. I mean, obviously that's what you want, but one thing he's like, Zeke's saying racing, but racing means you're getting, you might still be getting up to speed and that type of thing. And so I've sailed with some people that aren't as good as they're like racing. So they go straight up to close haul course, but they forget the acceleration side of things. And if you listen to how Zeke talks, he's even though he has some people that he sails with, he's still saying, we're accelerating here. He's still saying the key terms. So even though he said racing, he's also saying we're accelerating now. We're going for the pin. We're doing these different things, and he has different key words that he's saying. And in the end of the day, you don't just go from, stopping to, on the wind. There's these modes in between that they all get there with. And I think those are the communication things that Zeke says without even realizing he's saying it, but they're the right things that not everyone understands. You're supposed to say them. And so those are pretty key words, as he's saying, we're aiming at the pin. We're accelerating. So that doesn't mean we're going head up to win, and then we're racing. That means you're working your way up into, I'm on the wind, I'm sailing, I'm starting. And those are all important things to think about.
And the lingo comes from, we've been sailing a little over a year now together, but we've done a lot of sailing recently and with the same crew. So at the beginning, I would have to say, like, hey, when I say racing, it doesn't mean just point on the close haul direction. Racing means get the boat to its as fast a VMG as possible, as soon as possible. So sometimes I call racing if we've just gotten stuffed and we're head to wind or going backwards. We know that we're racing, the jib's out, the crew's being kinetic, and we're going to hit we're aiming for the best acceleration angle to get flow going, get the speed up as much as we can, so that later we can get close hauled and start actually racing upwind. So, And that's something that, you know, if that wasn't clear at the very beginning, now everybody on the boat knows. It just means start looking for our speed targets and our heel targets and get this thing up the race course.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to go backwards a second. And when we're doing that whole, circling side of things, and Zeke saying, well, we want to come from port around 2 minutes and find our spot. I think it was the first regatta where, literally everyone's doing the same thing. And so if one guy gets out of sequence, that's going to screw a lot of people up. And there was one of the races where I know very well, because my boat, which I wasn't racing, but my boat that was in the whole thing got hit because one guy was going the wrong way when about 5 very good teams were like in their final approach, but someone got themselves into the wrong spot. So, look for the rhythm in the pattern, and then look for where you're going to go. But that's pretty important to be doing the same thing everyone is, and that's going to make the whole starts a lot better. And, if you look at this start right here, you have most of the people on the line, starting well. This is a practice start, and obviously a big righty there. But, pretty much everyone's behaving. And even these guys that have hung themselves out where they couldn't start, they probably, if they're a good team, they probably had a plan that they're like, I'd rather be late at the boat so I can tack out, like this guy that just tacked, over being somewhere down like this guy back here where I don't know what I'm going to do. So, this whole sequence, and especially the speed, the talking that Zeke is saying, and he didn't even realize, he may have realized it, but he was going through and saying the words that I'm sure John, heard differently, 6 months ago than he did this past weekend. But it's all getting your team in the rhythm to get these good starts. I know John jumped on late there, but John, do you want to?
You want me to go play that the original start
on this? Yeah, John Heaton, can you jump on me? So basically, what was happening is the communication side of things that you and Zeke talk about, and all I really want to know is, John, can you talk to us how all the communication changed from when you first started sailing with Zeke to now that your whole team knows each other better, and just that process that just made your life so much easier from a communication standpoint?
So Ed, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what Zeke said, but I guess my view is it's more just confidence in each other, and frankly, me being more confident myself and trusting Zeke, which I should have trusted him to begin with, but it's more just repeating stuff together. And I agree with what I heard Zeke discussing. We're trying to simplify, I would say, as well as trying to simplify the language. Again, I heard Zeke say racing, and again, racing means get the boat to speed. It doesn't mean put it on the wind if we're not going fast. So it's just experience together, and trying to simplify the language, and where Zeke's not having to micromanage me. And we've just gotten better at it because we've sailed together more.
Yeah, so talking less, but still talking.
Yes, exactly. Slowing things down. The other thing is we tend to always do the same, I don't know what Zeke said, but we tend to do the same type of approach to the line, which is enter the box, 2:30, 3 minutes to 2:30. We're going to tack back. We have discussions about where we're going to be on the line, so it's not a surprise. Obviously, things change. Like in this regatta, there would be like a few times the left shift to get to the line quicker. But it was pretty much the same routine every time. Get to a certain depth, manage that depth, and then work from there. So we try to have the same, at least Zeke coaches us into the same approach every time, which helps a lot.
Yeah, so this video here, John, was the last start where you guys did a double tack, and you had to then slow down, and you had to do a lot of different things, but
yeah,
you did it.
We double tacked. So Zeke, I forgot to cross the boat. I don't know if Zeke said that. It's like, John, you need to cross the boat. But so we double tacked, and there was a puff right at the end, and it was a little sketchy, but yeah, we double tacked to get our space to weather, and came back, and again, because of the left-hand shift, we were able to double tack, gain space to windward, and then come back with speed. So we're the outside boat, I think, on the other side of that, the sail with the on the other side of 70 there.
Yeah, and that's and I'm guessing that maneuver yesterday versus or on Sunday versus if you would have had to do that maneuver the first regatta you did, probably a lot different.
Would not have been able to execute it. No.
Yeah, no. Exactly. So
no.
it's just talking, communication. Yep.
Yeah, and time together and patience with. The other thing is just the team. I would say the team's super patient with each other, and so stuff's going to go wrong, and you got to deal with that as part of the team building, and stuff's going to get screwed up, and then just try to talk about what's the right way to execute and do it again.
Yeah, and the biggest key thing is they figured out the rhythm that they wanted to do, where they wanted it to be, and all that, which all leads to success after they knew each other. So that's great information. Does anyone have any questions for any of these guys or about this situation? Okay.
All right.
Roy, do you want to move on to tactics?
Yes. This is. So I think I want to talk mostly about Sunday and the differences of sailing Sunday versus sailing a lot of the other times, a lot of the other days that we've had. We've been pretty lucky with this series with the wind. We've had a lot of fronts coming through, giving us good breeze. And what that's meant a lot of days, here I'll draw right on here, is that, the wind's sort of starting off, choose a different color that you guys can actually see. Wind sort of starting off to the left, shifting over to the right. And there's been exceptions to this, but this is sort of one trend we've seen that's happened a lot, is the wind sort of shifts right throughout the day up until a certain time, and then it settles around a certain angle. And there's still pretty big shifts, and they're not necessarily regular shifts. So you'll get a puff coming from the left and then a puff coming from the right, but you're not necessarily sure if that next shift is going to hit during the current upwind leg or not. Whether you're going to have to go into, hey, I have to get over to the other side of the course, or hey, I have to start playing these little shifts until the windward mark and then round it and then reset and play the game again on the next upwind. So Sunday was very, very different to that, and it was a little bit unforecasted. There was like one wind model that had the wind doing what it did, is just continuously shifting left, and most of the other ones said it would sort of settle out around northwest or northwest. But we had situations like this where right off the starting line, you might have this little puff here on the right side of the course, which looks pretty appealing. Windward mark's right over here for reference. And then that puff just sort of disappears and this big lefty comes in. So I'd be curious to hear what some of the people who had successful days have to say. In particular, I think what I'm interested in is did you expect this to be the type of a day of a progressive lefty? And if not, when did you realize that was the type of day that it was? Ed, you know the fleet better than me. If you want to pick on some people and call them out and get them to contribute. Well, I'll go and I'll pick out again about 70
Ed,
over.
Ed was muted there. He was trying to pick
Oh,
somebody.
okay.
I think Ed's muted.
Got it.
So, Sean O'Brien, you want to jump in here? I know you had a pretty good day.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this. You know, when it's real shifty like this, I'd love to hear from the guys that do this a lot more than I do. You tend not. You can live and die by one side, or you can go in the middle and sort of hope you start getting in phase with a shift. So we pretty much all day thought we'd kind of run up the middle of the course and just try to stay with the shifts and stay in phase with them as much as we can. The one race we won, we totally banged the left, and it worked out. And but for the most part, I think in those conditions, you have to sort of go up the middle, work one side if you can, and then once you get in phase and really sort of work those puff, because you can get so much VMGs and lift out of some of those puffs that we saw that that you just gotta hope you get them.
I'll add something to that because we had an uncharacteristically good couple of races that weren't luck. I mean, I think we thought our way into it. On Sunday, we used the puffs to make sure that we were connecting to the next puff. So what I mean by that is that, you know, a lot of times we would get into breeze and then we'd try to figure out, all right, is this the lifted tack or not? Then we'd always put a second consideration into that, which is, does the lifted tack actually take us to the next strategic element on the race course? And there were several times where it didn't, and we decided that it was better to stay in pressure to connect to pressure and then try to use that next piece of pressure to get forced into making a decision on where to go. And I think that helped us a couple of times, you know, in those middle races on Sunday where there was pressure on the edges, oftentimes, and if you used a puff to move back to the middle, sometimes you would lose the 5 boats you had just had in your pocket. So it was really important to connect to the pressure. And there were huge differences in boat angles that had as much to do with pressure as they did to actual angle changes, at least from our observations. So Sunday was really about connecting the dots. And I think for those teams that are looking forward to coming to Annapolis for nudes and North Americans, that's not an uncommon condition for the Chesapeake Bay in May. So it's probably a good practice thought to keep in your back of your head about how do you connect the dots.
Yeah, I think one of the talks that, you know, was big on, I think it was Saturday, was, you know, staying in the long puff, or staying in the puff to get to the next one. And that is really connecting the dots. And if you can stay lifted, you know, in pressure, but going to the right direction, or stay there for a long time to get to the best angle, then that's important. But trying to tack back and forth a lot, you know, is definitely going to be more of a struggle. So I think that's a very good point with the Chesapeake as well, is, you know, you need to play, you know, you don't just stay lifted forever, because you may run out of it and then you're dead. And then, of course, in a small fleet like this, you know, like Sean said, you can play the middle more, especially when you are doing well. But you got to be careful about being stuck in the middle too. And if you're near the middle of a 60 boat fleet, then you got to pick a side at the top. Otherwise you have the cone of death. And so I think everything does make sense here. But does anyone else want to chime in on, you know, something that they did that gave them success? You know, Sean did say they banged the left on the one, but they were pretty well all day. And for the most part, you know, I think watching from the committee vote what we could, you definitely saw people picking their way up. Zeke, what was the best thing for you guys? You mentioned your own little personal puff too, I think.
Yeah, it was, I have a deeply profound statement, which is, it's way easier to sail when you're in a puff than when you're in a lull. I think when it was out of this direction compared to when it was further north and coming over Davis Island, you couldn't see the breeze coming down very well. With just a little bit more fetch in this more west direction, it was a lot easier to see when the puffs were coming down. And I have a really hard time figuring out what the right thing to do is when we're down pressure, because the angle is oftentimes extremely average. And in Davis Island, if you're on an average number and not in pressure, you're getting passed on both sides. So if it was pre-start or coming into a leeward gate or just sailing in a decent amount of pressure on a good angle, it was always just like, where's the next line that's available to us? Oftentimes there were big lines of pressure that boats were in, but it wasn't available to us. We had to look at what was going to be coming towards us. We touched that, and then it was obvious because we had compass numbers in our head of what's a lift and what's a header, and also where's the mark. Once we settled into some breeze, we got the rig set up correctly, we got the weight where it needed to be, then it was obvious if we were lifted or headed or pointed at the mark or not, or covering our competition or not, and then we would make a decision. So going back to my deeply profound statement, get in breeze, full stop, sail in bad air to get there, look for it, because it was pretty easy to see, and then figure out what to do. If you're trying to make a decision when you're on an average number or a number that you don't know if it's good or bad and not in breeze, you're getting passed on both sides.
Hey Zeke, how did you? I rewatched the Saturday video prior to this, and we talked a lot about this in race course. I thought it was really well articulated on Saturday. There's some puffs you'd have to ride into, and some puffs you would tack right before it, and you get a nice VMG burst off the lifted side of it. Did you, when you're looking on the water, how do you kind of distinguish between those two situations?
From seeing what the trend has been, I mean, it took us a while to realize that phenomenon on Saturday, that it was, it would be something. It's something we've talked about a lot of this whole winter of sailing in Tampa. Is we've gotten burned a lot by getting a shift and tacking and not sailing into it that extra 10 lengths. And so we were trying to be really disciplined about doing that on Saturday, which was get the shift, be patient, take the header for the extra couple boat lengths, and then tack. And it was not working because we would get headed, sail into it, get lifted a little bit, tack, and be headed again, which is what you guys talked about on Saturday with those sort of more helicopter puff or cat paw puffs. So we just learned that by observing it repeatedly on Saturday, and then tried to adjust our game plan for it afterwards, just by seeing, I mean, how many times on Saturday were there boats to leeward of you showing a much bigger lift than what you had? Whereas on Sunday, again, it was a little different because you could see the pressures coming a lot easier on Sunday. They tended to last a little bit longer, and they were just more obvious and bigger. They were like more kind of rectangular ladder rung type puffs moving down the course, as opposed to these little touchdown and spread puffs. And I think Sunday went back to, recognizing that, making sure you really sail into the real amount of shift and pressure, and then tack and get the most that you could out of it. So,
because similarly downwind, we would make some big gains by just pressing out of those kind of burst puffs.
Mm-hmm.
Really recognizing when it hit, move the boat faster than normal, and really press out of them. We'd make 2 and 3 boat length pushes on boats that were 20 feet away from us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and that was a lesson we learned at the last regatta when we had the similar direction as we did on Saturday on those downwinds, where like we'd be looking for the big trends. Like there's more wind on the right side. Let's stay patient, stay in a mode that gets us on the right side for a big picture pressure. And we just get burned because other boats would look much more small picture, wait for those little helicopter cat paw puffs, whatever you want to call them. They would settle down and they would take them immediately down and stay connected in that little micro puff for much longer. So a lot of this is just comes down to remembering the trends, taking good notes, and trying to remember what happened last time, whether it's 5 minutes ago, 5 races ago, or 5 months ago. And I mean, this is a good opportunity to take some notes on the difference between this more northeasterly versus the northwesterly here.
Okay, this is all great stuff. I'm going to shift over to Kristen Berry because I know he has a 7 o'clock call. I do too. Let Kristen go over some of the things he was working on with the chartered sail. So Kristen, go for it.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, first, Ed, thank you. What a great winner. And it's been a ton of fun to be the data dork for this event and to help. It's been fun to get to know folks through getting their trackers and sharing tracker data and that sort of stuff. It's also been really cool to learn how to use this tool. And as a coach, I think that I've been very impressed with charted sails. There's lots of tools out there. Many of them are kind of overwhelming. And I think that this one in particular has struck the right balance of making the information kind of actionable and easy to see. So I don't want to take up too much time. I've got a hard stop, as Ed said, but also this stuff is much better if you kind of grind through it and look at it. And I make this promise to everybody who's on this call and anybody who watches this video down the road, which is you'll see the link will get shared with everybody of how to look at each of these days. And you can look at each race, and then you can drill down and look at each leg and look, do comparisons. On the screen right now, we're looking at day 1, race 3. And I just went ahead and pulled out Imperia and Jennifer, which were the 2 boats that won this first leg of that race. One of them probably won the race overall, but just looking at this as leg 1 of that race, I wanted to show some stuff that I think is pretty interesting and was apparent all winter long, which is J70 racing for the most part is not a boxing match. It's not very tactical racing as much so as it is drag racing, in my opinion. Certainly you've got to call the right side, and you've got to be tactical and strategic at the right moments. And there are a couple of races where we've got big splits in the fleet. But in general, the tacticians have the boats going more or less the right direction. What separates first from second, and certainly first from 10th or deeper, is average VMGs and distance sailed. So you can see on the screen here that there's a 40-second time delta between first and second around this mark. And their average speed through the water for the leg was exactly the same, 4.87 knots. But what was different was a 1/10 of a knot, or 1/10 and 5/100 of a knot difference in average VMG, which is 40 seconds of difference. That doesn't sound like that much, but it's if you look at where I spend a lot of my time in the fleet, we're about 3/10 of a knot off of the average VMG of the race leader consistently in the races where we're in the back half of the fleet. And 3/10 of a knot, gosh, put the bow down for a second, you ought to be able to recover that. But it's about averaging it over the course of the whole leg. That's the big difference. And I think in this leg here, where we're looking at the full tail of the leg, seeing the whole leg, you'll see that a big difference here was that Jennifer had to throw in 2 additional tacks. And that's sometimes tacks matter, but for the most part, they're always going to cost you something. Stand by. They're always going to cost you something, so you got to make them worthwhile. So as you see these boats going up the track here, there's not a big difference in where they're deciding to go. There's not a big difference in their boat speed. But then as we get up here to the very top of the beat, Jennifer doesn't quite pick her way through the scrum at the top, and that makes a big difference between where they go around the top mark. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Nothing revelatory there, although, Zeke, I know you were making a joke about sail and pressure being not that big of a comment, except for we so often forget those things under all of the pressure of everything that's out there on the race course. And I really think that for J70 sailors, tacking is so easy, but it's so costly, and we see it over and over again expressed in the data. So anyway, I wanted to show that. In this same race, I want to switch to 2 other boats and show you something that I think is pretty cool. And just from the standpoint of you guys wanting to know how the tool works, if we want to, we can look at all the boats here, and we can sort the data any way we want. We can look at the finish rank for the leg. And here again, if you look at the full tails, you can see there's not a lot of drastically different decision making. But then we can also sort the time of the leg and the distance sailed. This is a great evaluative tool for you all to use in your sailing to see what was our problem today. Were we too fast, sailing too much extra distance? You know, look here, this Sweet 16, they're new to the fleet, and that's awesome. They were fast, right? 4.9 knots through the water, but they sailed, you know, quite a bit of extra distance versus the boats that were ahead of them. So they know that they need to sheet that main a little harder, maybe get a new jib. They were sailing something from the first generation, I think, and try to get those boats to go uphill a little more. So it's a nice tool for that. But what I want to show you here is just comparing two boats. We're going to look at bow 32. That's a electric pickle, and bow 57. That's us on the Danger Mouse. I'm going to advance here up the beat just a touch where we get side by side. So I want to freeze this here, and then I'm going to switch over to the instruments panel and show you something cool. So both of these boats are sailing using the new Velocitech. And this gives you access to a bunch of information that can be great, not only in looking at your races, but also really figuring out if you're sailing the boat right or not to its best angle. And here you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the box that both boats are sailing at a pretty consistent 20 degrees. This is on Saturday. I'm guessing that the boats that are in front of these two boats, you know, Zeke and Jennifer and the rest of them, I bet they're sailing at less. And as we scroll through here, you'll see that we're rocking from somewhere down around 12 all the way over to 15, up to 25 at times. I bet the boats that are better than us on this leg are much more locked in. Now, again, that's not, you know, never heard that before, but I think when you find a leg where you did really, really well, you can dig in and figure out where were you, what was the neighborhood of your angle of heel, and really hone it in. I know a lot of boats are using Vmg systems that allow them to put that as a heads-up display. Those of us who aren't making that investment can still look at this data after the fact and go, gosh, that felt really good, and use that to imprint it into our brains a little bit. So pretty powerful tool there. Again, especially if you're doing some practice and whatnot, it's useful. All right, I want to scroll over to day 1, race 3 downwind, and show you one other thing here. So I got to move my zoom box. There we go. Downwind 1. Gonna look at all the boats here. Again, you know, not big changes in where people were going. You know, I think the shift righty came in here and let people go downwind. But if we get back here on the performance tab and sort this race a little bit, just amazing to watch what Zeke and John and his team are doing downwind. You know, their average speed is much higher than everybody else, and they're not afraid to sail a little extra distance to make that happen. And McFly had a really good run, but it looks like they were just a little bit low and slow. And there's so many passing lanes in these downwind legs in these boats because they can sail such radically different angles. I mean, shoot, we're sailing VMG to wing sometimes. That's a 30-degree angle change that might only cost you 6 or 7/10 of a knot. This kind of stuff is going to help you realize how you got past or where you got past and figure out if it was a bad decision. Did you sail to the wrong side of the course? Or is it just raw boat speed? And as I scroll through this stuff, I think more and more often I'm seeing that these are pretty squarely boat speed decisions. But I think that as we look through day 1, there were lots of boats that were trying the wing. And if you were one of the tracked boats, it's worth going back and scrubbing through this data to see if the wing was working for you. And if you could get onto the wing and stick it and hold it, it generally was. But if you screwed up once or twice, you got a little too low coming, you know, into your setup and then couldn't get the kite full right away, or the helmsperson came up too fast to try to get onto the high wing and luff the kite again, it was pretty disastrous. And there were a couple of boats that really made the VMG angles work downwind. So that's worth mentioning and noting. This information that you're seeing here, I'm just going to zoom out to the full race here. This information that you're seeing here is going to be available to everybody. So I'm going to send the links around so that everybody can see each race from each day. And I'm just going to show you very quickly how to use it. So you're going to get this link and it's going to bring you to a page for each day, each session. And what you'll see for each session is what you see on my screen right here. A spaghetti bowl of tracks that are really hard to sort out at this zoom level. But then down here in this lower bar, you've got each race. And you'll be able to click on that race and just focus on it. And then from there, you can determine if you want to look at all the boats or track a specific boat. So here, I'm going to clean this up and just track one boat for this race. And again, we'll use Imperia for this since Zeke's on. So here we're able to see where they went through the whole race and use this to evaluate either against our memory or against our own trackers where we went and figure out how that stacked up. And you can add boats as you go along. So here we'll add us and see big difference between Zeke and the Imperia and the Danger Mouse in this race is economy of maneuvers. We were probably trying to find our way into some clear air. Zeke was punched out and able to go where he wanted to go. But then we can also see just, the differences here. We sailed fast in that breeze, but holy cow, we sailed so much extra distance over the course of that whole race. That's going to make a 2-minute delta or a minute and 12, 15-second delta there. So,
Hey, Kristen,
anyway.
Can I ask you a question about, so if we, talking back to that, I believe it was day 1, race 3 was the upwind you talked about?
Yep.
So what you said was that similar speeds between the top 2 boats, but the difference in time, the difference in VMG was what made you say that it was more of a drag race than tactics. What metrics would you see if tactics mattered more than drag race?
That's a great question. So, first, let me clarify. I think that with this tool, you can immediately see if it was strategy versus tactics. What I mean by that is if there's a big separation between the 2 boats, one went left, one went right, you'll be able to see as they go up each one of their individual legs, where there was more speed and more pressure. So I don't have a good image of that. I'd love to show a big split where one boat's going 0.2 faster than the other. That would help you identify, even without the benefit of video, that there was a puff on one side of the course versus the other. But here you can see these boats are going up these legs side by side, and if we can track right along with them and see what their instrumentation is saying at any given moment. And you can see what their angle is, what their boat speed is, and therefore what their average VMG is as well as they're zipping along here. And so that's where you would see that. Now, tactically, I think if we had a race where one boat kept trying to get to a side or kept protecting against the fleet, you would see them come in, lay underneath somebody, and then watch that whole fleet have to flop and go the other way. And in fact, I think I have one, I think you might see that. Let's see if I can pull up all boats here on this leg. I think Imperia does a nice job of herding. Yeah, so check this out. So here, Imperia's gotten their nose clean. They're the purple boat right here. They've got their nose clean. They're going to find an opportunity to get across the fleet. As soon as they start managing that fleet to the ley line, they keep pushing them. As soon as they've got the inside track, you can see that they've laid it up inside there, and they were able to do that. Now, of course, they were near the ley line here, and let's be honest, for Imperia and many of the other top teams, their ley lines are narrower than some of ours are. But they were able to really herd their side. They knew they were going towards the better side of the course, so they were able to ignore the yellow, the red, the pink, and the green boats here. But they're really making sure that they're owning their neighborhood. When that brown boat tacks underneath them, I think that's Jennifer, by the way. That's probably their nearest competitor. They don't go far. They make sure they put one on them right there and get up to the mark. So I think that shows you the tactical side, Roy. I hope that kind of answers your question. So, all right, well, for the sake of time here, it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to step off, but I want to, again, Ed, thank you. Roy, thank you. And for all the competitors that are here, if you want to take a deeper dive into this information, one, it's going to be available to you. I encourage you to scrub through it. Even just write down questions, timestamp like, what the heck's going on here? Or could you help us understand this a little better? Part of my commitment to this fleet out of this winter is to share, my knowledge of the tool and help you understand the information. As you guys make your way up to Annapolis for Nudes and North Americans, if I can be helpful at all, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to have more teams using this tool and sharing their information because we all benefit from it. I know that for sure. And Zeke said something earlier that I thought was really important. He talked about taking notes. I promise you, with these races that we've captured from this event, next year's Davis Island is going to be even more competitive because we're going to be able to look back and go, it's going to blow from 300 today. Let's go scrub through last year's races where we knew the wind direction was from 300 and see what happened. Where did the winners go? And use that as a starting point for forming our daily strategies. So this is great information that's shareable for everybody. We don't have to hope the memory bank is clear enough to remember all of it. So with that, thank you all. Appreciate you.
Sorry, just my mute button. Yeah, thanks everyone. Does anyone have any questions? I think Kristen's got to go, and if anyone else, we can stay on for a little bit longer if we need to. But I think it's definitely been a great year, and looking forward to figuring out, what we can do next year. So go ahead and ask any questions now if you have any. I'll give you a couple minutes, and I definitely want to thank Zeke and Kristen and Roy and John for jumping in and giving us information on what works for them. And I think that's huge. And one of our goals here is to be able to dissect some of these smaller pieces and put them into like a 5-minute option, for people to look back later on it and that type of thing. But if no one has any questions, you definitely feel free to jump in later. But thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Roy.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
I'm eating.